Hello, I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another edition of a San Francisco Conservative. I am bringing my journalist hat, or wearing my journalist hat, longtime producer for CBS News, CNN, ABC, and so on. And I love great conversation, thought-provoking conversation, and that is why I'm honored to be joined by my friend, the great author, David Parker, who is the author of Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative. Hey, David, how are you today?
I'm fine, Tom. Thank you.
Great to see you. Let's just jump right into it. Before we started rolling here, I'd mentioned I had a phone conversation with a good friend of mine who actually lives in San Francisco also. He is he's a Chinese American, came to California as a young man. Now he's in his 50s, very successful in business, but he had some hard times, but he really pulled himself up by his bootstraps and so on. And we were talking about, again, in the news these days, there's a lot of talk about Asian American discrimination, other kinds of discrimination. And I like what you've told me in the past about how to overcome that. And I think our audience would like to hear about that as well.
I just have noticed, having lived in Europe and traveled, that minorities in every country experience discrimination. Some are religious minorities, some are ethnic minorities, but they have to overcome it. There's in India, women are discriminated against, for example. It's a very misogynistic culture, and some women have risen to the top because they just go around it. And my advice to people, for example, in America, let's say you were a Black person and you trained to be an architect, and you can't get a job in an architect's office, and they're not going to hire you. So you work for a Black architect, is my thought, and you work for Black clients. And over time, the market will beat a path to your door if they think that you really have something to offer. And a perfect example is the Negro Baseball League. The Brooklyn Dodgers wanted to win the pennant, and he says, let's go pick up the players from the Negro League. They play better than we are. Why are we pretending that we're ignoring them? Bring them over. And that's how it works. You turn within your community. Greeks have come to this country, Irish have come to this country, and signs in the windows when they first came, Irish need not apply. So how are they going to work? You have to work for yourself. You work for your community. And then the world realizes that it's pretty dumb to exclude you when businesses are here to make a profit, and if they can make them do much better by hiring better people, they'll, if they have to, they'll hold their nose and hire the better people. And then you gradually, pretty soon, no one's talking about that anymore.
So rather than sitting on the sidelines and saying, hey, life is unfair, or I'm being discriminated against, and I think in many cases they are being discriminated against, but you say that when you produce work of quality, you produce value, that can't be denied, right?
Chinese in San Francisco, which you would think is a liberal city, were really badly treated for most of their experience here. It's only now that that's not an issue. They just went around it. They knew when they came here to buy a house, buy some property, the landlords in San Francisco, or many of them, are Chinese, and the wave of immigrants before were Italians. Many of the properties in San Francisco are owned by Italians. They bought a little house, and then they bought something bigger, and they became financially independent. That's another thing, become financially independent. That's one of my big themes in Income and Wealth, my other book, that then you don't care what the economy is doing. You can even do what you want in life, be an artist or open a restaurant, and may not make any money. But that also is a good protection against discrimination. You don't care. You don't want me, I don't want you. That would be my response if I were a minority. Mm-hmm. I'm a minority, but I'm not suffering from it at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, again, you can, if this is going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but again, this came from my conversation with my Chinese American friend this morning, and he's built several successful businesses and worked hard and all that. And he said there seems to be, people are sort of noticing those companies that really do produce value. You live there in the Silicon Valley, and it sounds like, you hear about people putting in hundreds of millions of dollars to businesses to, what are we really producing here? And perhaps we're reaching a period where people really notice value, speaks for itself. Do you find that to be true?
Companies that are bringing in hundreds of millions at a crack, they may talk. In fact, young people today, millennials, talk like they're kids a little bit, and you have to be careful not to fall for that. They're throwing you off. That in fact they're much smarter than they appear. And nobody runs $100 million companies and doesn't know what they're doing. They were screaming at President Trump when he was getting tougher on immigration. Says we need the best immigrants from around the world. We're competing with China, especially at the moment, and American public schools are not producing enough quality people. So they don't. Silicon Valley didn't care what your ethnicity was. They didn't care what your race was. If somebody was good, they were grabbing them from around the world, not only here. So that's how the market works. Money speaks. Money will kill discrimination.
Yeah. No, it's interesting speaking about money, and certainly that's logical, talking about your first book, Income and Wealth, and certainly your second book, San Francisco Conservative. There still seems to be a tendency in politics, certainly among the Democratic Party, I would say, even though I've voted that way many elections, to throw money at problems. That's kind of the old cliche. And you mentioned about education that I'd love to hear you elaborate on that.
Overheard in a Brooklyn barbershop by one of the cats in my band. If you can solve a problem by spending money, you don't have a problem. This nation is awash. The world is awash in cash. It's chasing very few investments. It's why certain assets are way overpriced. Real estate, for example, and art, because and stock market, New York Stock Exchange, all those stocks are way overpriced because there's so much money in the world chasing something viable. So there's not a shortage of funds. And if money could solve, we would do that. That was the thinking behind the war on poverty. President Johnson, during the Vietnam War, when we were running a deficit, says it was so unconscionable that a nation should have a 15% poverty rate, especially a rich nation like us. I'm going to declare another war, an unconditional war on poverty, and we're going to spend what's necessary. And they did spend. They spent, since the war on poverty started, about 23 trillion, which I've been researching is 3 times the amount of all the money spent on every war combined that the U.S. has ever fought. 3 times as much.
So poverty has been defeated, I take it.
Yeah, with nothing to show for it, because the poverty, the needle hasn't budged from 1958 to 2020. You can go to your search engine and Google poverty rate USA. There it is. It hasn't changed. On average, some years higher, some years lower, but on average, it didn't change. You can't solve, because problems are personal. You get up in the morning, you can't do that for somebody else, and show up for work, not just once in a while, but on time, regularly, whatever is required, and have some education and have some job skill. The market, there's a labor shortage in a dynamic economy like ours. China has a labor shortage. They're kicking themselves for their one-child policy. There's unemployment, except during an economic downturn. We have a labor shortage. It's an Achilles heel of a dynamic economy. There's no reason that somebody should be So that's proof proof in itself. They spent money on poverty programs, and poverty hasn't moved. They spent money on education, and test scores plummeted and have not come back.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. And a couple minutes ago, you were talking about, the skilled workers there in Silicon Valley, and whether they're immigrants or native-born Americans, value speaks for itself. And I was wondering, I certainly know, having read your book, Income and Wealth, one of the topics you focus on is how income and wealth are two different things, and that we don't need to be limited. I know that another one of the themes of that book is the role of government interference in our lives. And, with that Silicon Valley example, it sounds like you're saying that government needs to give individuals a little more credit for creativity, for the entrepreneurial spirit, and that by, government forcing itself into our lives, we're sort of, corrupting or robbing ourselves of that opportunity for that, creativity, that entrepreneurial spirit. Am I reading it correctly?
Yeah, but you can carry that thought further. We're a Jeffersonian democracy. One of Jefferson's big statements is that citizens not only can, they do think for themselves. And he says every person in this country gets the vote, irrespective of wealth, irrespective of social status. Everyone gets the vote. That's what we're fighting for in this revolution. There'll be no king or queen. We'll have a government so small you won't even be able to see it. Everyone's on your own, and it's possible. He says he has faith. He had faith in the average person to think for themselves. So government shouldn't step in. The country was based on the notion the government wouldn't do that, and we reversed that. And we don't. So there needs to be a big crash, or something needs to happen for the public to think maybe we went the wrong direction. Maybe Bernie Sanders is not the right direction.
Do you think, again, I know people listen to podcast episodes at different times, what we're talking about today, things may change a little bit a month or 3 months from now, but at the moment, people are really talking about inflation, the price of gasoline per gallon and so on. How important are those factors?
You have to just take it all in stride. When the market is up, prices are up. When the market's down, prices are low. There could be a natural catastrophe. There could be a war. That happens on a regular basis. Whenever there's a natural catastrophe or a war, oil prices go up. If there's a drought, the price of food goes up. It's on a regular basis. But we're not fighting wars every year forever. There's long periods of peace, and prices come back down again. You have to, I guess, change your lifestyle for a moment. You have to adapt. That's what human beings do pretty well.
Sure.
You can't be making excuses.
Yeah.
On the financial independence, that's one way to handle discrimination. You don't care what people, they won't hire you, I'll hire myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll be independent financially. I don't even have to work. That's one of my big themes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just wanted to throw in, we're about midway through our conversation for today. We are listening to a San Francisco conservative. That's the name of this podcast series. It's also the title of my friend David Parker's new book, and his previous book is also a must-read, Income and Wealth. And David, we're talking about high prices, and certainly what that brings to mind for me, I had a couple doctor's appointments earlier this week, and I'm kind of shocked at how much we're paying for healthcare insurance and so on. How did that come about, and what can we do about it?
Don't get me started. That's a perfect example of government interference in a market. Healthcare is a commodity, like peanuts, chewing gum, automobiles. You pay for what you want, what you need, and you bargain for the price like you do for all those. Before government stepped in a big way, which is Medicare and Medicaid, the price of health insurance was the price of auto insurance, which is the price of life insurance, and is also the price of a single family home. Even for $1 million single family home, it's about $200 a month. Everybody can afford that. If you can't afford that, maybe you can afford $100 in this, and charity or the government can step in and make up the difference. We're a very charitable nation. Nobody wants to see people without health insurance. It's wrong that people are walking around without health insurance. If you were a young person, it would cost about $50 because you're not, the statistics show that you're not going to probably get sick. When you're older, it might cost $300 or $400 because you're probably going to get sick. But that's all. That's the only difference. We're paying $1,000 to $2,000 a month for health insurance, and it's all wrong. It wouldn't be that expensive. Problem solved if government stepped off.
It seems a little illogical also. I think some insurance rates are different. If you cross the border, if you live on one side of the border, 1 mile over the border, cross over the border, buy your insurance in a neighboring state, you're paying hundreds of dollars less per month. I mean, why? But apparently, I guess we're not allowed to do that.
There's an interstate commerce clause that says states can't do that. They can't forbid somebody buying products or forbidding products coming over. Government is so interfered in that market. They enforce that. I believe the health insurance in New Jersey is 2 or 3 times what it costs in Pennsylvania. In part because Pennsylvania lets citizens not pay insurance for everything. If you don't want insurance for transgender change, you don't have to have it. In California, you have, it's part of your policy. So if it were a market phenomenon, people would buy the health insurance that suits them personally, tailor-made for themselves, and not pay for stuff that they don't think they need.
Yeah, that makes sense.
3 times, that's a big, 2 or 3 times is a huge difference.
That's crazy. Yeah, I can't understand that at all. Interesting.
You can, this is what's called medical tourism. You can get on a charter jet to go to Mexico City or Singapore, and it's 2 or 3 times less again.
Yeah. Well, we just have a couple minutes left in this episode, and I'd love to close this conversation again, going back to, you've studied for many years political history and economic political economy. What was the intention of the founding fathers at the very beginning? I know you've written about Alexis de Tocqueville and what he noticed about, was unique about America and that kind of thing. And I think we've lost perspective on all that. Can you take a minute to remind us?
Alexis de Tocqueville should be required reading, certainly in college, but maybe in high school. He screamed at America for its slavery. He says, get rid of it. What is wrong with you people? But beyond that, because he says Americans, he's never seen a country where citizens were so responsible. I mean, for an American to read that book, it makes you proud. He thought America was a great place. In the backwoods, he says, you go to Kentucky, people are in a log cabin. They have newspapers and they're reading and they're arguing with their neighbors about the political events of the nation and the world. He says that didn't exist in Europe. Farmers or most people are not reading the newspaper and talking to each other about the ideals of democracy or what their country stands for. You have something really special. And it never occurred to him that the founding fathers had anything wrong. Limited government. We need a neutral third party to do some things. You don't have to have, the market can provide everything, even defense. The Taliban defeated us. That wasn't their government. It's a bunch of guys got together beat the United States, no problem. So the market can solve everything. We just don't want it to sometimes. That's fine.
Definitely thought-provoking, especially with what's going on in the world at the moment. I think we're out of time for this episode. I just want to remind everybody to please look into buying a copy of David's two books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. They're both excellent. I always tell David, as a journalist, I noticed that historical context is missing. And David, I know you recently said, well, Tom, maybe that's not the job of journalism because we're recording what happens today. We can look back at those newspapers. I have a friend who collects newspapers, from the 1600s, the 1700s. So the journalists are recording the information of the day, but I love what you've captured in both of your books that really puts these things that, what the progressives are calling for, the, overextension of government in our lives. And it just is really wonderful. So thank you for giving us both of those great books.